Hey everyone, Cold On here with another VOX Immortalis commentary guide. This video is for heroic Ragnaros. We finally dropped him, and it feels great. I believe our total attempt count was 267 to get this guy down, so clearly a lot of time and effort went into this, and many thanks to all the VOX members that put in that effort. It feels really good to have him down. So this commentary is actually going to be a little bit different than some of my previous ones. Normally in the past I would slow video down if there was a lot to explain in a fight, but after many commentaries and takes on this, I just could not slow the video enough to get everything in, and if I did, the video was actually so slow that it was weird to watch it. It felt like it was not running at a constant frame rate because it wasn't. So to alleviate that, I'm doing this slightly different. Basically, this is running at normal speed, but I'm going to repeat phases over and over until there's an adequate amount of time to explain everything that's happening before we move on to another phase. So I marked the phases at the top when they transition, and hopefully that'll be enough time to explain things. So anyway, we're obviously in the first phase, and this one is the closest to normal of all the phases. The only major difference on heroic is that we have a new debuff when Magma Trap is triggered called Magma Trap Vulnerability. And this lasts 45 seconds, and it causes future Magma Trap damage to deal 50% extra to everyone in the raid. So I think the idea behind this was that you would trigger a trap, get the debuff, and then you'd have to wait 45 seconds for that debuff to drop before you triggered the next trap. But because traps are spawning much more frequently than 45 seconds, you get this backlog. So as we transition into phase one again, just repeat it, now you can kind of see how we're handling it and dealing with this debuff. So the first Magma Trap we trigger right away, so you see it landing on the right there, and we'll immediately get that 45-second debuff. So in our case, our Warlock is doing that trap because it's right next to him. And then the second trap, instead of waiting, we found early on a good strategy was that we could actually trigger the second trap even when we have that 50% damage bonus debuff by using raid cooldowns and, of course, strong healing. So the second trap is about to land there, and even though we have 20 seconds left on the vulnerability, we'll trigger it immediately, and everyone is topped off and has cooldowns going, so we survive it. And this basically buys us 20 seconds. Otherwise, you would have had to wait for that debuff to drop. And in the end, this means that you have fewer traps to deal with in the second phase, as you'll see. So here comes the third trap. Now, we can't trigger this one right away because we now have 2 stacks of vulnerability, and that would kill people. So instead, we have to wait for the vulnerability debuff to drop. And once it drops, we trigger the third trap immediately. So we have about 8 seconds left on that, and you'll see we're going to trigger that trap just as the phase is transitioning into the first transition phase. So depending on your DPS, sometimes you can skip the fourth trap entirely. You'll see we transition into the phase, but the fourth trap is mid-air, so we didn't quite make it, but sometimes you can get it. Okay, so we're in the first transition phase, and you'll notice that even though the hammer's on the right side of the room, there are 5 Sons of Flames over here. This is the first major difference between normal and heroic, and takes a lot of practice and planning to get used to. So unlike normal, where you would get a 2-6 or 4-4 split on the Sons of Flames based on the hammer, in heroic, the number of suns that can spawn on any given side of the hammer and the position of those suns that do spawn are both completely random. So whereas normally, if the position of the hammer's on the right like it is here, we'd get 2 on the right spread out. We now have 5, as you can see, and on the large open side on the left, we have 3 only, whereas normally there'd be 6. So regardless of where the hammer lands, you can have 0 on one side and all 8 on the other, or it can be 4-4 split, just any combination, and where they're located can be random. So to sort of explain how we handle this, we came up with a system, took a lot of iteration and practice, but it works well for us. So essentially what we do is we figure out which side of the hammer is the shortest side between the hammer and the wall. So if the hammer's on the right like it is here, then that short side is on the right. And if the hammer's on the left, the short side is left. And if the hammer's in the middle, we automatically assume that side to be the right side. So whatever system works for you, but that's what we came up with. Once we have established that side, then we use a number system for all of our DPS players. Each player is assigned a number, and then this number is used to determine which Son of Flame they kill. So we count off from the hammer going on that short side, so in this case on the right side. We count off 1 through however many sons are on that side of the hammer. So number 1, our enhancement shaman takes that first son closest to the hammer. Number 2 is our mage. Number 3 is our shadow priest, and so on. Once we run out of sons on that given side, then the count continues on the other side of the hammer, closest to the hammer, going out from there. So if there's 3 on the right, then the 4th one on the left, closest to the hammer, is handled by that 4th person, whoever's assigned number 4. So this way, no matter how many spawns come on any given side and where they're positioned, players automatically know what they're killing and how. You still have to take advantage of stuns, like AE Wrath of Stun with the Glyphed Paladin version is really good. And the single target stuns, Hammer of Justice, things like that work really great here. But overall, that's our basic strategy for this. And it works no matter the combination of suns or where they're located. Okay, so that pretty much covers how we handle Sons of Flames. And again, it takes a lot of practice, and you kind of want to order your DPS in order of burst damage. So the lower the number, the higher the burst should be generally. Also, any with stuns are also very good to be low numbers. So as we go into phase 2 here for the first time, you'll see that we stack up in melee range all on top of each other. And this is so that first smash goes over our heads. We don't have to worry about it. Now the main tactic here is you'll see that by stacking up, we force all the molten seeds to land in one location. So normally when a molten seed lands, it will deal AE damage once it lands in a short radius around it. But because molten seeds spawn from sort of the lava in the room behind you, and they're projectile, they have a travel time. So this means when they actually are spawned, they're targeting the location of a player when they spawn, but that player can move out of it before the seed lands and therefore avoid the AE damage when it goes down. So we sort of take that to the next level by forcing everyone to stack up, and when we move as a unit to the right just as the seeds are spawning, so that none of them land and hit anyone with their AE, which would kill people. This forces the seeds and therefore the elementals that spawn out of them to all appear in basically the same location. So it takes some practice, but it's not too difficult to do that if you have one person that sort of tells everyone when they're moving. And also if you have raid-wide movement effects, that's very useful as well. So like as a druid, I use my AE sprint for one of those movements, and then I'm also a leather worker with the drums, so between the two of those we can use a movement effect every time we move. So the reason for doing this is basically to get those elementals as packed up tightly as possible so that we can start AEing them as soon as they appear. Now we're going to transition into phase 2 again, and I'll talk about why we do this. But if you look on the right, you can see that we have 2 raid markers, purple in melee and a red one sort of back about 10 yards. And these are used for designations of raid members when we move over to the right after the seeds have spawned. So it took a lot of iteration and number crunching, experimentation, all that good stuff to come up with a strategy that worked for us. But basically when we move over to the right, we have people assigned to one of 2 groups. Either 4 people in the front are in purple, 4 people in the back are in red, and then we have 2 people on their own on the left side. So by doing this 4-4-2 split, this means that no matter who gets targeted by the 8 elementals, you'll never have more than 4 elementals stacked up with each other. And this is very important because the elementals on heroic are very dangerous. They can't be stunned or snared like you normally see them. Instead, they melee really hard, and they also gain that stacking buff based on how many elementals are within a short radius around them. So, by splitting the raid into 4, 4, and 2, this means that no matter who gets targeted by elementals, at most you'll have 4 elementals near each other, and therefore the damage from the melee attacks of an elemental cannot be buffed by more than 3 other elementals due to stacking. So elementals that are attacking people on the purple marker cannot be close enough to the elementals attacking people at the red marker to buff them. So again, that maximum stack will only be 3. This means that the damage output is not so severe that it can't be healed fairly easily. The downside, of course, by splitting off is that you don't have as many elementals grouped up. So again, we came up with this 4-4-2 split, which still keeps pretty much 4 elementals in any given area stacked up, so you can AE them pretty efficiently without actually killing people off due to the damage output. So again, it's a nice balance between the two. The other thing I should mention on this phase is that obviously there's still smashes, and there's also engulfing flame. And this is very different than the normal version. So obviously on normal, you would just have engulfing cast in one of the 3 locations, front, middle, or back. And then once it's cast, it stays there until it disappears. But on this heroic version, it will cast pretty much 4 times in a row for very short periods and randomly go between those 3 locations. So you have to do a basic dance. And this can be very challenging for people to get used to. It takes a lot of practice. Basically, you want to stay not right on the edge of it because the graphic is not exactly the size of the AE, but you want to be close enough that you can transition between 2 positions quickly. So you'll see that the reason we also have these red and green markers where they are is because that's basically the line between the front and the middle position for engulfing flames. So people know if they're on one side or the other of those markers, they should be safe from engulfing on the other side. Lastly, I mentioned in phase 1 you're going to have a trap left over, and you can see we do have a trap. So we kill this off when everything is safe. Basically, in our case, we're killing it after we've dealt with the elementals and everyone's healed back pretty much to full health. Then we trigger that final trap so it's not up for the transition period. And of course, more importantly, so it's not alive during the 3rd and 4th phase. So you can see here we're dealing with the elementals. The second set of elementals will have a smash that occur right after they come down, so you need to be ready for that. And we're dodging the flame, and then we're going to trigger that trap. And there it goes. And so now we're pushing into the next transition phase. And one thing that's key is to keep DPSing him even as he's casting Splitting Blow there. And this will get him a couple extra %, which is very important. So we're entering the second transition phase now, and this is very similar to the first. In regards to the Sons of Flames, you still get 8. There's still random locations and random number on any given side of the hammer. So you have to deal with those just like you would before. The main difference is that you also get Lava Scions, of course, but instead of killing off all the Sons of Flames as quickly as possible, like you would do in the first transition, in this one you have to actually kill off only 7 of the Sons and leave 1 of them alive and slowed, so he's below 50%. Because you want this phase to last as long as possible before you have to transition into the 3rd phase. The reason for this is that you're trying to kill off the Scions before you have to actually force Rag to come out for the next phase. This will maximize your DPS time on Ragnaros in phase 3. You're not dealing with the Scions, basically. So to do this, you kill off 7 Sons of Flames and leave 1 of them alive. So the way we chose to handle that is our tanks pick up the Scions like normal. Most of the DPS deal with the Sons and dealing with the ones closest to the hammer first. And then usually we have our Death Knight DPS sort of handle the Sons with one of our Paladins, our healer, off on the open side, basically away from the hammer. and they get them all pretty low. And then the Death Knight will choose one of the suns, the furthest one away usually, to keep alive. So the other 7 are killed, and then he gets one really low but doesn't kill it. So if you look in the bottom right, there's the final sun, and he's in the lava, and he's just hanging out. So this allows us to ignore that guy and focus on the scions here while the phase transitions. A couple tips for this is to watch your dots. Obviously, you don't want to kill them on accident. Practice, again, will help a lot. And then even tanks should be helping to DPS the suns. Like what I pretty much do is get the debuffs on my scion immediately as a druid tank, and then I start working on whichever sun needs it near me. And again, utilize your stuns if you have them, and tank cooldowns are important as well. But anyway, you're trying to get that sun of flame left alive. And a Death Knight is good because if necessary, they can death grip the sun back away from the hammer to buy yourself a little more time. So once the suns are under control, get the scions in the center. So you see here we're taking them nearby so little AE damage can help. And then we're watching the timer on the transition. If the transition ends before the suns are dead, Rag will one-shot everyone in the raid. So you can see we just have a few seconds left, and we're calling for that last sun to die. And we've managed to kill the scions as Rag is coming back up. So this is perfect. That's what you want to do. So going into phase 3, everything shifts to a complete DPS check. This phase is all about burning Rag as fast as possible. And there are a few things that we learned that I'll hopefully share to help you with that. So the goal here is to get Rag below 10% health before a second meteor spawns. To do this, you have to basically do 30% of his health within 90 seconds. So if you're wondering, the DPS requirement to do that is about 247,000 over 90 seconds sustained. So it's a lot. So you really need to pull out all the tricks that you have to meet that requirement. And I'll explain in the next phase why having 2 meteors is bad. But suffice to say, you really want to try to use all your DPS to only get 1 meteor for this phase. And you still have engulfing flames to deal with, and smashes, and of course the meteor itself. So you'll see that we split off the raid into 2 basic groups, again using our markers that we have positioned for the second phase. And we split them evenly. So since tanks are not valid targets for meteor, it's important that you have 4 people that are non-tanks on each side. So since I am actually technically a tank on this phase, but I don't tank during it because of the DPS check, I'm on the left and our main tank is on the right. And then we have our 2 healers on the right healing him. And then we have 2 other DPS on the right and then the rest on the left. So basically we have this 2 tanks split and then 4 on each side otherwise. This basically means that the meteor can have a 50% chance to pick either group at any given time, which is important. You want it to mostly be transitioning between groups if possible. So the other thing is we have 1 person on each side assigned to managing the meteor. So if it comes close to one group or the other, that person on that side hits it. So on the left here, our warlock is managing it. And when it's risking, or it's fixating on someone on the left, he smacks it. And on the right, our holy paladin is mostly doing it. And this is another important key so that everyone else doesn't have to worry about hitting the meteor and they can focus on Rag. I also mentioned going into this, the second transition phase, it was important to keep attacking Rag while he's casting that hammer before you engage the suns. And this is, again, a DPS thing to get him low. So you have him hopefully around 38% when he comes up for this third phase. Another key factor is, of course, the second transition, killing the scions before Rag comes up. So again, you're just focusing on Rag this whole time. Other than that, it's all about saving personal cooldowns. This is really key. No one should have any cooldown unavailable when you go into this burn phase. So you can use everything you have, potions and cooldowns and bloodlust and everything. Also, even specs that are more geared toward a burst are really good, even if they're worse at the rest of the fight. So like our warlock is a demonology just for this phase because he can burst really high damage when it's necessary. because otherwise you're going to have a lot harder time with the entire fight. This is also why I am tanking. Usually I was healing, but we found that even a full tank spec feral can do a lot of burst damage, and I'm basically able to do equivalent of about a lower end DPS during this burst phase, even though I'm a tank, technically. So all these things add up and really help you out. The last thing I should mention is once you see that you're going to get ragged below that 10%, the person that's being fixated by the meteor should kite it away from the raid to transition into the last phase. So you can see it's being fixated on our warrior. So he's kiting it into the nearest cubby, which happens to be the left cubby there, that circle area. So now that you're entering phase 4, you want to have the meteor as far from the center of the room as possible. And the reason for this is if you look at the room shape, it's a giant circle, except for the two smaller circles on the sides and those cubbies that jut out. So if you can get the meteor into one of those cubbies at the very edge, that's as far from the center as possible. And this allows the rest of the raid to deal with the other mechanics at the start of this phase before they worry about the meteor, which is important. So the first main mechanic is superheated, and this is a stacking dot that hits everyone in the raid every 1 second and does really heavy damage very quickly. So you can heal and mitigate it for a while with cooldowns, but eventually you need to step into these patches of frost, which you see under rag called Breadth of Frost. Once a player steps into that Breadth of Frost, he immediately becomes immune to superheated damage, and your current superheated stack is reset to 0. However, the trick is that rag is monitoring player position throughout the fight, and if 4 or more people are ever stacked up within 6 yards of each other during this phase, he will cause a pillar of flame to spawn under you, which does damage, knocks you in the air, and most importantly, it will destroy a Breath of Frost patch that might exist in that location. So you need to find a way to have most of your raid within the Breath of Frost without being within 6 yards of 3 other people at any given time. So to do that, you actually have to form a triangle within the Breath of Frost patch. By doing this, you basically form a triangle at max distance with the points of the triangle at the very outer edge of the Breath of Frost patch. If you have 3 people in each point of that triangle, you won't be within 6 yards of 4 people, or of 3 other people, basically, and you'll be safe. So the way we do this is we have 3 people assigned 3 raid markers, and these people are basically the anchor points of our triangle. So we have the moon in front, diamond back right, and the triangle back left. And these people get into position early, go to the very edge, form that triangle, and then 2 other people are each assigned to one of those raid mark persons. So that in total, again, it's 3 people per position on the triangle. The key is to go in slowly when you're moving into your position. There is a bit of client-server lag as well as just the patch itself only ticking a couple times a second. So it can appear that you're not safely in that Breath of Frost when in actuality you are just fine. So you need to just step toward the position you're going to go in, but not run and try to stop on a dime where you want to be. Just inch your way into it until you see that you have the buff, the Breath of Frost buff, and then you're safely okay. So the next main mechanic is, of course, meteor. As I mentioned, you want to have the meteor as far from the center as possible when you start the phase. And the reason for that is because you want to allow people to figure out where the Breath of Frost is, get into position, form their triangle slowly and methodically before they have to worry about kiting the meteor at all. And this can be a very tricky situation. So this is why phase 3 burn is so important, because if you have 2 meteors, you have to obviously deal with 2 meteors at the same time, and you have to deal with meteor twice as long as if you had 1, because of how you get rid of them, which I'll explain in a moment. So you can see at the start of the phase again, our warlock is continuing to knock that meteor back every 6 seconds, and this allows everyone else to get set up in the triangle positions on that first patch. So you can see the moon is stepping in close to rag. That's sort of the melee people. Our tank on the diamond is back right, and then our caster's back left. And then once they're in position, then the meteor's finally about to get close enough that people need to start kiting. So when you're in the triangle and you get fixated, you have to run out away from the frost patch so you don't cross anyone else, and then start kiting the meteor away. After a few seconds of kiting, your assigned person can knock the meteor away from the group again, at which point the previously fixated person will be no longer fixated and they step back into their triangle position safely. Meanwhile, a new person is fixated, so you can see someone else is running the meteor away at the top there until it gets knocked back, and then they step back in their triangle position and continue. Once a new breath of frost spawns 45 seconds after the first one, you can move the meteor into the original breath of frost, which you see we just did there. And this causes it to freeze. Once it's frozen, you want to kill it immediately. It takes a lot of extra damage and it dies really fast. So once the meteor is dead, it's gone for good and you don't have to worry about it for the rest of the phase. This greatly simplifies the fight or the phase for most of the raid, because then you just have to worry about initial positioning in that frost patch and only moving to new ones every once in a while without kiting a meteor or anything. So this is really key. Once that meteor is dead, then the raid just worries about moving between frost patches. So the next main mechanic is what I'm doing. So you may have seen early on I clicked on a little cloud called Cloud Burst, and this gives me a buff called Deluge. So as you may have done the math, 3 people on 3 points of the triangle is a total of 9. So you have this 10th person left over, which is what my role is. This person will deal with Dreadflame. So you click on the Cloud Burst, you get Deluge buffed, and this causes you to be immune to superheated damage. So I'm not taking any damage as I run around here. But my job is to step on these little patches of fire, which are spawned by Rag called Dreadflame. So early on in the phase, he'll spawn 2 patches in random locations around the room. And after every couple seconds, one patch of Dreadflame spawns another patch. And then that one expands again and again and so on. So 1 become 2, 2 become 4, 4 and 8, and so on. Therefore, the obvious mechanic is that you want to deal with these Dreadflame patches early and quickly. The faster you get rid of them, the easier it is to handle. So try to use someone that has movement boost effects. So as a Feral Druid, I obviously have 30% innate plus a lot of sprints. So it's pretty strong for me to do it. But Blink or Disengage from Hunter, things like that work as well. So yeah, Dreadflame is a very key factor. It's also cast initially at the start of the phase, and then 40 seconds after that, 2 more patches appear. 35 seconds later, 2 more again. 30 seconds later, 2 more. So it goes down by 5 seconds between cooldowns. So this is your Softened Rage. Eventually you'll have more Dreadflame than you can deal with. So the final mechanic is a tank thing. And there's basically one ability that Rag uses every minute called Empowered Sulphurous. And this is a 5-second channeled cast. And once he completes that, he has a 10-second buff in which any melee attack he lands will do an AE that one-shots the entire raid instantly. So to deal with this, you have to kite Rag and get him to stand into these roots that are cast around the room in a random location by one of the NPCs. So you can see the roots are actually spawning to my left right now. So when Rag starts to cast Empowered Sulphurous in a moment here, you'll see that, there he goes, he's casting now. We have someone taunt him, and this will drag him over the roots. So there he stands on the roots and he gets rooted, and now he's stunned for 10 seconds. So the 10-second Sulphurous buff should be mitigated by the 10-second stun as long as you stun him in the roots after Sulphurous is gained. The key here is that most raids will use 2 tanks for this phase because you continue to have Burning Wound stacks just like the rest of the fight. However, we found that because Burning Wounds last 20 seconds, you have a 5-second Empowered Sulphurous cast, a 10-second stun from roots. There's only 5 seconds in which your tank has to figure out how to keep Rag off him. So what we did is actually unique, and it worked really well, is we have a non-tank that will taunt Rag into the roots when necessary. So our DPS Death Knight is doing it for us. So he'll taunt Rag back into the roots, which he's doing right now. And then Rag gets stunned. So again, the 10-second stun plus the 5-second channel Plus travel time means that our main tank, our paladin, only has to delay Rag attacking him for a few seconds before his burning wounds drops off. And if he does it properly, his burning wounds will never get above like 9 or 10 stacks, which is completely manageable for your healers, since no one else should really take much damage for this phase. So this allows your basically off tank, which is me in this case, to deal with something else, and then you don't have to use what would normally be a DPS player to deal with Dreadflame. So you see here, my DPS would be crap anyway as a tank and attacking from the front. So instead I'm able to deal with Dreadflame, and this maximizes your DPS for the raid itself. So this worked really well for us, as you see, and our Death Knight did a good job of that. And so, yeah, that's phase 4. It's a lot of stuff going on. But overall, it's an insane fight, and really glad to have it down. And so, yeah, that's Heroic Rag. Good luck, and thanks for watching.